My presentation topic is, are victims of mental child abuse more likely to manifest into abusers themselves or break the chain of abuse? That broke down basically is just asking if the victims of mental abuse are more likely to become the abusers or stray away from that chain. So, mental child abuse. A basic definition of mental child abuse is when someone injures a child's self-esteem or emotional well-being, including mental and emotional abuse. So the verbal assault is more like all of the yelling, where the emotional assault is taking the child and their soft points as a person and just destroying those instead of just yelling. What is child abuse and neglect? So child abuse and neglect are serious issues. Many children are abused each and every year. Several victims of mental abuse as children believe that their lives in their household are normal for everyone around them. They believe that their situation is being lived out through all of their friends, all of their family members, everything like that, so there is no uniqueness to their situation. They think that it's okay and that it's normal, that this is what a healthy relationship and household is within the world. And the faster that we are able to spread this knowledge as a community, the more children we can save from this crime. So this video basically just further explains child abuse and neglect in depth and gives you a more standard definition so that more people are able to recognize if they've been emotionally abused as children, and going into adulthood if they have the supports that they need. And so here goes the video.
You may have heard about child abuse and neglect. Do you know what they mean? They include acts of commission and omission and are preventable. Child abuse and neglect include acts of commission and omission. What are acts of commission? Acts of commission are deliberate and intentional. However, harm to a child might not be the intended consequence. Some examples include physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. What are acts of omission? Acts of omission are the failure to provide for a child's basic physical, emotional, or educational needs, or to protect a child from harm or potential harm. Some examples include physical neglect, emotional neglect, medical and dental neglect, educational neglect, inadequate supervision, exposure to violent environments. About 1 in 7 children experience some form of child abuse or neglect in the last year. But we know the problem is underreported. That's why a consistent definition is so important. The good news is we can stop child abuse and neglect before it starts. What can we do? We can work together to promote safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments so all children reach their full potential. Some strategies to consider include strengthen economic supports to families, change social norms to support parents and positive parenting, provide quality care and education early in life, enhance parenting skills to promote healthy child development, intervene to lessen harms, and prevent.
Okay, so basically just to recap that, it was talking about how the community and everyone in the community can reach out and give a hand to those in need or those who may be struggling with a hard time. There are many different kinds of help that you can reach out and give. You can give out parental advice if people ask. You can give out the support and just the comfort of you being there to others. You can easily just kind of help the child to put them on a better path. So in school, on the playground, whatever children do. So ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, a lot of people refer to ACEs as the different childhood experiences that one child could go through, as well as the abuse. So they're subcategorized into 3 different categories. It's abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction or housing dysfunction. In the abuse category, there's of course the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Physical abuse is going to be any physical harm brought onto a child. The emotional abuse is any behavior that can bring emotional trauma onto the child. So anything just attacking their emotional well-being. In the neglect section, physical neglect is ignoring the child's physical needs compared to emotional neglect, which is declining the child's emotional needs. Housing dysfunction is all the things on top of the emotional abuse that could be going on at home. So any mental illnesses, divorce, if a mother is treated violently, any substance abuse like alcohol, drugs, anything like that, or incarcerated relative like a relative in prison, rehabilitation, or just not in the child's life. These different subcategories can help adults who were abused as children kind of figure out what category they go into so they can get the proper help that they need. 1 out of 3. So 1 out of 3 survivors of mental abuse, they manifest themselves into their abusers. They become the abusers. They are unable to break the chain, and they don't know any better. They think that this is normal because this is what they've grown up with. You can see just by watching kids that they kind of develop and they adapt and they kind of absorb the things that their parents do. If their parents are washing the dishes, they want to help join. If their parents are vacuuming, you can see all of like the small vacuums, all of the different cleaning supplies that kids like to play with because that's what their parents are doing. So really, it's just the norm for the people who are being abused that don't break the chain, which leaves 2/3 to find their better path in life. 2/3 of the people break away from their abusers and they're able to kind of rebuild their own path. And even though they don't know anything different, they can take the support of others, they can take the different kinds of supports that they have, they can take the anonymous groups, they can take therapy, all of these different support groups to make it so they are taken care of as well. So this large population of survivors, these 2/3 can still have those ACEs that we talked about, so like the abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, all of those different things. So those can develop into like underdevelopment of their brain. It can have social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Cognitive being the brain impairment, emotional being like you can't really feel the emotions, emotional stunting, and social, just any social situations, you can't really handle it, you can't fully set out with your potential. There's adoption of health risk behaviors. Heart disease, lung disease, and diabetes are really high up on the list with all of the emotional abuse survivors, and eventually that can lead to like early death, so adoption of the high-risk behaviors like depression, anxiety, diseases, disabilities, and then unfortunately early death. So I was going through all of my research and I found this quote that I really liked. It was about this girl who was describing her time and how she was emotionally abused by her stepmom. So her mom and her stepmom were raising this child, and both of these moms were emotionally abused. They both had mothers who were alcoholics, and they weren't able to completely fulfill their lives until they were old enough to do so. So this quote says, "My mom was able to heal and work through her own trauma healthily. She's been in therapy and attended Al-Anon groups since the 1980s, while my stepmom was very much not able to do so and ended up emotionally abusing all of us from the time I was 8 until the time I was 23. So from this quote, you can see that emotional abuse doesn't stop when you get older. Like it said, 8 to 23, that's a pretty long time gap for her to be abused, so it doesn't just stop if the abuser stops. These two very similar situations with both of their moms being alcoholics and emotionally abusing them and all of this household dysfunction, and yet they both chose completely different paths. Her mom was able to break away from that chain and continue to strive and raise her child, while her stepmom was not that lucky, unfortunately. So in my conclusion, although 1/3 of the population that were emotionally abused as children do go on to become the abusers, and 2/3 are able to stray away from that, 33% is too high of a number for us to just not care about it anymore. So my solution is just to reach out to make it more acceptable to talk about these things so that more people can break away that chain and live a healthier, better life.